Gregg versus Georgia. In 1972, the Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty systems then in place were unconstitutional, violations of the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishments. In response to the decision, many states changed their death penalty systems. 4 years later, in Gregg versus Georgia in 1976, the court reaffirmed the death penalty as constitutional.
Troy Leon Gregg was an individual who was incarcerated within the state of Georgia subsequent to his arrest and conviction of the murder of 2 individuals in 1973. Subsequent to his trial, the jury had found Gregg guilty and sentenced him to death. Troy Leon Gregg and other inmates who were on death row claim that a death sentence was a direct violation of the 8th and 14th Amendments of the United States Constitution. The date of the Gregg versus Georgia case was decided on July 2, 1976. The Gregg versus Georgia was heard in the United States Supreme Court.
Gregg was the first individual in the history of the United States whose respective execution was accepted by the Supreme Court of the United States. However, during the evening prior to the execution, Gregg escaped from his incarceration and was killed in North Carolina as a result of a scuffle in which he was involved. The amendments involved in this court case was the 8th and 14th Amendments. The 8th Amendment declares that cruel and unusual punishment is illegal, and the 14th guarantees your right of due process of law.
In a 7-2 vote, the Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty does not violate the 8th and 14th Amendments if it is applied fairly.
Justice Stewart, Justice Powell, and Justice Stevens all concluded that the punishment of death for the crime of murder does not, under all circumstances, violate the 8th and 14th Amendments. They also said that though a legislature may not impose excessive punishment, it is not required to select the least severe penalty possible, and a heavy burden rests upon those attacking its judgment.
The significance of Gregg versus Georgia is that it made the death penalty legal once again. The death penalty had been illegal for a few years, but it was reinstated by Gregg. The death penalty has come to be something of a hot topic in the American politics. There has been a great deal of controversy over whether it should be abolished or what sorts of reform it should be made of its administration. These would not have existed had the court kept the death penalty illegal in Gregg versus Georgia.